Hello everybody, I hope you have enjoyed watching the previous video tutorial about this project. Remember that in this one I would like to show you some tricks and ideas with or from the illustration on a miniature. So in this one I would like to continue painting the face and the hand, because in that kind of skin I would like to play with more loose brush strokes from the illustration that Gerald Brom made it. So it was amazing. So it's a really rich illustration with 1,000 of tonalities, variety of colors, nuances, everything. So sounds amazing for me. So it was a really pleasure can paint a model like this one from him, and this is amazing. So something that I would like to explain you in this one is how to use glazing with your brushes on a miniature. Something that usually I don't do, because I usually use my airbrush to blend with the glazing. For me it's faster. You will paint, I think, with once you understand how to work with airbrush, you will have more precision, you will aim correctly in the places where you want to paint, and I think it's just faster and technically better, just that. But it's true that in some places, or for the effect or something about the style, you can't use the airbrush to blend with airbrush to use glazing, and you have to use your brush. So how you have to work when you want to use glazing with your brush? The idea is, as you see on that video, just using a dilution like 80% water and 20% painting, something like that. More than that, I don't recommend you that, because you will need to invest a lot of time. But it's true that 80-20, you will need enough time. So keep calm, paint one layer, keep time drying, and then paint a new one. So all the details that you will see now, I'm painting with a dilution between 50-50 or 80-20. So 80% water and 20% paint. So when you want to add outlinings like I'm doing now, I recommend you colors from Model Air or Game Air, colors designed for airbrush, or inks, for example, something like that. But if you don't want a glossy finish, I don't recommend you inks. So Model Air, it's fantastic to paint freehands, like you can see now, because have different dilution inside and have retardant to keep more time painting. So the painting will be more time wet. It's better to thin with your brush, the brush strokes, aim better, because the painting will be wet on inside of your brush more time than with regular painting. So this is the idea why I like to use this for freehands. So now I'm using that kind of color to paint that freehand that came from the illustration, and for the eyes to paint the outlining and something like that. But this is something that I don't want to say like glazing. So for me, this is like 50-50 dilution, 50% water and 50% paint. Why I like to use that kind of dilution better than glazing? Because glazing is just to finish, just to add tonalities, to blend at the end, but never at the beginning or in the mid-tone, in the mid-moment. Because in the mid, you have to continue painting with more painting than water. So the idea to use more water than painting, it's like now, that you have to add different tonalities, just that. So as you can see, I'm painting with my brush strokes, but looks like doing nothing, right? So it's like Sergio is doing something with his brush, but where and why and what? So this is a glazing. So paint with that style, never. I don't recommend you. You have to enjoy painting, not frustrated painting with that. This is just like dirt, water, with a bit of pigment inside, just that. It's perfect once you have done everything about the base coat, the midtones, the highlightings, all the shapes. There, when you have all that stuff done, it's time to use blending with your brush or airbrush using glazing. This is the correct moment, at least speaking by myself, to use glazing on your models. And this is how I work with them. Really free. So you have to feel freedom painting with them. If you will be stressed, worry about something, don't do it, because this is the way to do it. It's just paint one brush stroke, and then if you like it, increase a bit with another glazing. Just that, as you can see, it's like, okay, there I would like to have more from this color. So I'm going to add a new one. So keep enough time drying for the first one and then add a new one. This is the correct way. If we want to add glazing and glazing and glazing without time drying between layers, you will remove some of them and will look like crackles or will look completely disgusting. So it's like doing something that you don't know how to work. So the most interesting with glazing, it's doing exactly the same as you do with capibases or with another kind of dilution. Keeping enough time drying between every layer. This is the correct way to use acrylic. If you want to use wet blending or stuff like that, I don't recommend you to blend or work in the way I do, because you won't have control to blend or to get these small surfaces or tonalities between or inside of details. Because if you have for example, an area completely flat without any detail, yeah, you can use wet blending. Or if you don't be worried about the definition, you can do it with wet blending. But if you want to add all that tonalities with wet blending on that face, you will lose a lot of details in the middle. So step by step, just paint one layer, dry, and paint a new one. The idea to paint 80% and 20%, it's just because you have to add like 4, 5, 6 layers to have the uniform base coat with the color that it should be. And if you add just one, maybe nobody will see. If you add 2, you will start to see what you are painting. And with this, you can understand it as filters and blend between layers at the same time that you are adding different tonalities. And where you have to add these tonalities, in that case, I was copying more or less in general. I was creating like an example about the illustration on my model. So I was painting in the same ways, more or less, that the illustration has. For example, something really, really tiny, as you can see now, is this kind of eye that he or it has in that forehead. And this, the most important is the definition. So if you see the outlining, it's really dark. And this outlining, as thinner as possible, you have to represent it, okay? So if you can do a thinner line, perfect. This is the end. You don't have to create something thinner if you can't. But if you can, do it, because the most important is the contrast. So now to paint the eye, the iris, I'm going to use a really dark color. Talking about color, I don't want to use black. Always, I love to use color. So in that case, I'm using that brown, and then I'm going to add inside the new one. So as you can see, this is the way I work to represent that iris. And then once time it's done, it's time to use glazing on the top to have this gradient, as you can see. But if you see at the beginning, was painting with capibases or more or less similar, with flat colors, with a lot of contrast, and then use the gradient, and then for sure the bright. This is something tiny, and you can see how much detail you can add on your models. But remember, the most important is definition. Once time is defined, all the volumes created or shapes created, it's time to add glazing with your brush or with the airbrush, but always at the end. This is a technique to finish, never to start. So if someone told you that you have to start with glazing because you will remove detail, it's wrong. So you have a lot of ways to do it before to use glazing. Glazing always to the end. If you want to paint the base coats, for example, with airbrush, with glazing, will be weird, right? So it's the same, do it with your brush. You have to use bases, thin bases, to cover perfectly, completely uniform. This is the way I do. And then just continue adding more colors where you need. For example, if you want to add more tonalities, continue adding tonalities. If you feel that you didn't paint it, or you know that you didn't paint it, something, just paint it before to continue painting with more details or tonalities, because maybe something that you have on your mind is like, okay, I need to continue working on that, but I don't know how to do it. So maybe I need to add more tonalities, and maybe it's just paint the lips or paint the eyes or paint something that you are watching with the base coat, just that. Then when you have done all that areas with at least 1 or 2 colors, like to define just that, maybe you have to ask you again, maybe I have to add more tonalities on his skin, or maybe not. But this is the way I work. I always try to get more and more definition between layers and before to use glazing. In that case, because I would like to copy or interpret better the illustration, I try to do step by step a bit near of the original artwork. It's super hard to do it. It's something that for me was fantastic, but I would like to bring to my miniature world too, because it's not the same a 2D, a canvas, than a miniature. So you have to play here with volumes, with shapes that in a canvas you don't have them. You have to create them, but maybe with a low contrast it's okay. In this one, you have to increase more the contrast. At least this is my opinion, and this is what I did. So here you have more examples about how to work with glazing. This is a correct glazing, like 80% water and 20% painting. Just paint one brush stroke, then keep enough time drying, go to another area, paint a new one, go to another area, paint a new one, and then if you want to repeat, once time the area is completely dried, you can add a new one. You will increase the color, so it will be like having 40%. And this is more or less the result with that tonalities. You have the tonalities about the base coats to represent the shapes, and then the different tonalities with this kind of violets or blues, and these greens and magentas. So this is the result. This is how you can see with a really big zoom everything, always thinking that this really tiny model, and now it's time to paint the hand and the rest of the details. So what happens when you want to add something like this on your models? Like, okay, you have to copy something that you loved, like from an illustration, for example. So you have to try to translate everything that you are watching to something easier or simplified than the illustration, because remember, it's not the same something bigger than smaller. How much small is something, more synthetic will be, more effective, more technically than artistic should be. Because if you try to add thousands of tonalities but you didn't define correctly the shapes, will be like doing nothing. So here, if you see with the hand, it's a perfect example to explain you that, because has a lot of wrinkles, the fingers and the OSL. So I have to define a bunch of stuff just here. So the most important now, define with the outlinings everything. What places? Between the fingers, between the wrinkles, between the OSL and the other part of the skin. And as you see, I'm trying to take enough care to paint only in the places where I want. It's better paint thinner and less than should be, and then add another layer to continue covering everything. Remember that something that everybody do. It's paint with the same color, the same temperature, the same value, the same at the end on all shadows. So you will see now the two fingers that I'm going to paint them at the beginning, like I always talk like this looks like an armor. So like painting there, there, and there. So this now looks like we have exactly the same contrast between these two fingers and between that wrinkles from the fingers. So you have to connect them. These shadows doesn't work like that. So you have to connect them, and then with the next highlighting, you have to keep the previous color as a shadow, as I'm doing now. So you have to connect them like that and keep between the fingers only that shadow. So now with the base coat that you have now will work as the shadow as should be with the next layer. This is important now because usually we paint everything with the same shadows. And we have to understand that should be a lot of different shadows with different values, and more if the shadow has more depth or less. So I connected the fingers, looks like doing nothing, like a base coat. It's like, why should you have painted with another base coat if he will repaint everything? This is just to build in my mind, imaginary, everything. And now with the next layer, with this one, I'm going to create more midtones. And with the previous layer, maybe in some places will work as a shadow. So it's just repainting 90% of the previous layer, more or less, or 85. But in general is paint a lot. Remember that this one is something really complex because it's from an illustration and I try to copy as much as possible or try to do the most similar artwork because it was under the license from Brom. So I have to do something that he will say, it's okay. So you see, now with that layer, I'm going to keep the previous layer as shadow in both sides of the finger to represent better shape. So to increase the shape, increase the volume. Remember that if it's something really small, we have to paint with more contrast. This is something really important because if you try to paint with, for example, 7 layers in a place like that, you won't have enough room to add 7 layers. So maybe you have to change all that 7 layers, like, okay, base coat, maybe 1 layer, and maybe another highlighting, and we'll be okay. If you want to add more layers, you will have to understand more like tonalities. Like, okay, I'm going to use glazing to add there or there and change something, the color, the value, something. But talking about glazing, then with the glazings, you can amplify the number of the layers, but not with capibases, because if you try to add 7 layers there, maybe it will be really hard. So maybe you won't do it. So always, before to start painting, think about how much or how many layers I'm going to add there, how much information I would like to add. All that questions are important because it's not the same a place where nobody cares, like the feet, nobody cares, than, for example, the face. So the face is a place where if you have to invest a whole day just to paint 25 layers, do it. But in a place where nobody will see, just maybe with 5 layers or 3 will be okay. This is something always talking about to enjoy painting. If you want to create the best artwork that you can, for sure, you have to paint with 25 layers everywhere and then on the face with 40. So as you see, I continue adding another highlighting, but now only on the tip of the fingers, just there. And here you see just playing with the value. I don't want to change the temperature or change the tonality. It's just trying to define correctly as the illustration, everything there. And then if I need to add tonalities, I'm going to add them with glazing, with my brush. So you see, once time you have painted with capibases, you have to add this glazing with the same color to blend between layers. Another stuff, always define everything. Nails too, so define them. So don't keep them with just the base coat. So define everything is the key, is the most important, more than the tonalities. I know you love tonalities on the skin or everywhere. It's like, I would like to play with green, now with yellow. It's fantastic, yes, but once time you have painted the technical part. Maybe it's the most boring part, but you have to do it. Remember my words. So as you see, I'm glazing now with different tonalities. And at the same time that I'm glazing, I'm going to smooth or blend the areas at the same time that I'm adding different tonalities. This is where you have to play with cold temperatures, warm, changing the colors, something that you can imagine, adding freehands. But once time this part is done. So you see, it's like doing nothing. Glazing, welcome to the glazing world. So you see, once time I start to adding this glazing, looks better. Looks like I invest, I don't know, whole time painting just the hand. It's true, I was painting a lot of time in the hand, but once time I've painted the volumes, adding this glazing, it's fantastic because it's just playing completely random. Sometimes it's like, okay, I would like to add this color there for any reason, or I would like to change something there. And this is the result once time you have painted everything. If you like one color, you can increase the temperature, or you can increase the opaque color, or see more that color. So you just add a new one. Sometimes when you have the background ready, it's easy because you only have to add more layers from the same color. And with that, it's enough. Now talking about the OSL, something that you have to understand. OSL, it's a tricky idea to represent light effects. In that case, I have to play with yellow. So to represent that yellow like an OSL, the most important is create something, a shadow between this new color, this new surge of light, and the general light. Why? Because if you paint without line between, you don't have to paint a correct line, perfect line. It's just see something darker between that light and the other light. Just to represent with better intention that this is a new magic lighting. So this is something important because if you didn't create that, maybe you will have to add it later. But for sure you will have to have shadow between that yellow and the color of the skin, always. Because if not, maybe it will look like you painted in the wrong place. Just that. And then use glazing to blend, and just that, this will be the process. So this is how I work with the glazing. This is my idea in general talking about glazing. This is the result. Okay, so this is the model. And I hope you have enjoyed watching this one. So I would like to continue surprising you on the next video tutorials about this project because it's something different, something that I usually didn't do, and I hope surprise you. So thank you very much and see you in the next video tutorial. Bye bye.